Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with more revenge stories. If you haven't already, please don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for exclusive Reddit content. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Park in Our Disabled Spot, Enjoy Selling Your Home. So, my little sister, who is the sweetest girl in the world, is 12 years old but cannot walk or communicate. Her mental age is around 6 months. She obviously cannot attend a regular school, but since we live in a big city, there is a wonderful school for kids like her. Even though we don't own a car, since we don't need one, we got the city to put up signs in front of our house designating a 4-meter spot for wheelchair pickup and drop off for her school bus every morning and afternoon. The signs went up perhaps 2 years ago, and after the first week we never really had any issues since most of our neighbors are wonderful and totally understanding of our designated spot. For some context, we live in a perhaps poorer community, though we are well off. But in our 9 years here, we have had nothing but great interactions with everyone here. Sadly, the neighborhood is gentrifying and we are getting more self-centered people with their Mercedes-Benz or Audis honking while my sister gets loaded onto her school bus, which takes around 4 minutes but blocks our little street. This really pisses us off, as well as the other sane people that witness it. Naively, we thought this would be the extent of our unpleasant interactions. In September, we woke up like on any other Monday morning to find a shiny BMW parked in our disabled spot. It was not just partially in it, it was positioned perfectly to take up the entire spot. To make things worse, there were about a dozen open spots on the block, and it is not like they were all vacated that morning since we wake up at 6 AM. We were baffled. I had seen this car many times since last July, and it was definitely the same car since there are not many Burgundy sports cars in our neighborhood. It was usually parked about 20 meters south on our street, so we knew it belonged to a neighbor a few doors down. We did all the basics in this type of situation. We took a picture, took down the license plate and called the police to report it. The cops came by within the hour and wrote a big fat ticket. I believe it was for $700, but don't quote me on it. Anyways, it was a significant amount. At around noon, a smug, angry guy came knocking on my door. I had the day off from school and was home on my own. It was obvious that it was the owner of the car, so I made a quick decision to record the conversation, or screaming match, on my phone. I opened the door, and before I could say a thing, the douche lays into me. I'm a 16-year-old guy and he is in his mid-40s, midlife crisis maybe. He accuses me of all things ranging from putting up those signs this morning to frame him to being racist. He was East Asian, I believe, but we have a really diverse community. He goes on to say that disabled spots should not even be a thing, that it is always empty, totally shooting himself in the foot based on his previous comments, that we should pay for his undeserved ticket, that it is not even an inconvenience since the spot next to his was free and my sister could just get on the bus from there. Once he finished, I said okay and shut the door on his furious face. He rang the doorbell another 5 times before storming off. To my satisfaction, the recording caught everything fairly clearly. In the evening, I told my parents what had happened and gave my dad a copy of the recording. We have a pretty tight-knit community for the most part, and there is a neighborhood Facebook group with around 3,000 members. My dad decided to post a summary of what had happened along with the recording and a picture of the car in our spot on the page. There was immediate uproar with people saying they would fight back or whatever. We were humbled by the feeling that our community was standing up for us, but we did not think anything would come of it. The next day I leave the house to go to school and walk by the guy's car, back in his normal spot, and notice that the front right tire was deflated. Upon closer inspection it was slashed. As I said, our community is tight-knit, but I cannot say I expected anything like this to happen. The guy must have seen the Facebook post because he did not come back to our house to complain or accuse us of anything. The following weeks were sweet. Whenever I saw him in public, people would go up to him and remind him that he was a crappy human being. A bit harsh in my opinion, but they were not my words. In November, his house had a for sale sign in the window. The house market had also gone down by a bit. I'm always kind of curious about how much houses similar to ours are selling for compared to how much we paid for ours in 2010, so I knew what he paid for it in July. Once I saw the for sale sign, I rushed home and checked the local house listings, and lo and behold, he was selling for $90,000 less than what it was going for in July. He really wanted to get out of our neighborhood. While his crime was not nearly worth $90K, I must say that I don't feel bad. Worst case scenario, he sells that obnoxious car of his, which would easily cover the lost money. Let's just say that we have not had a single car parked in my sister's spot since. And you know guys, for me personally, I'm not really a big fan of having a great relationship with all of the neighbors and literally everybody in the city. I don't care that much for that. But one thing I noticed is that here in Thailand, at least if you don't live in a condo but instead live in a house, people in a neighborhood literally all know each other. And in addition, they also help each other out whenever possible. I suppose in the really big cities that is also not the case, but at least in the smaller cities I have definitely noticed that. And by the way guys, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to like the video and post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled Dad Helps My Friend and Me Get Back at Middle School Bully, aka Why You Should Never Anger a Dad Who Happens to Be an Engineer. This week was our middle school reunion. Most of us went to the same K-8 schools, ages 6 to 14, for our friends across the pond, and while we all were laughing and talking over Zoom, my friend, whom I will call Janice, brought up this memory. At our schools, with the exception of kindergarten, 2 grades would be paired together, so 1st and 2nd grades would be taught together, 3rd and 4th would be taught together, so on and so forth. The 7th and 8th grades had to do a special project every year called Toy Team or TT. Basically, we would be put into teams, build a specific toy that we could market. Representatives from local businesses would be invited to judge our projects and win awards in various categories: best presentation, best design, best research, etc. The idea behind this project was to teach teamwork, ingenuity, creativity, etc., but in the end it caused more trouble than it was worth, for reasons I will get to in a moment. I hated TT with a passion, the biggest reason being that the boys would take over the building of the toy and the girls did the secretarial work, listing results, surveying the groups, writing final reports, etc. It was not fair, but I was always too afraid to speak my mind and ask to help building, something I've always enjoyed. But 8th grade year was the one that almost broke me because of one kid. Enter Carlos, not his real name. Carlos was in 7th grade but was touted as a math and science genius. He had to go to the local high school to take math/science classes because none of the teachers at our school were qualified to teach at his level. He also prided himself on being a cool kid and had a gang of sycophants follow him around, reaffirming his greatness. In reality, Carlos was a little punk who honestly should have used a lesson or two in the school of hard knocks. He was a jerk to the highest degree, always looked down on everyone else, and since his parents, who were honestly Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy, come to life, defended his actions and threatened everyone around them. Because it was a private school and Carlos' parents were big donors, even the teachers were limited in what they could and could not do to discipline him. The worst they could do was detention, but he just shrugged it off. Seriously, unless he killed somebody, Carlos was untouchable. Janice and I were thrilled to be in the same group until we learned we would be paired with Carlos. Carlos immediately took over the project and bossed Janice and me around. Janice and I were favorite targets for Carlos and his sycophants because we were quiet, kept to ourselves and just focused on our work. Carlos proceeded to make our experience in TT miserable. He claimed that because he was the big math and science expert, only he could build our glider and we had to write it down. Janice and I put up with it at first because we knew our teachers would do nothing and it was just an 8-week long group project. And then one day, during week 6, it happened. We had to test the gliders. Our testing rigs was set up with yardsticks and rubber bands on tables. You would load the gliders into the rubber bands, pull them back and launch. Then you would measure how far they flew and make your corrections. Once again, the boys took over and the girls did the recording. Janice and I were making notes when I noticed the rubber band was about to snap due to how stretched out it was. I warned Carlos about the rubber band and to adjust the glider. When he protested, our teacher, who I will call Mrs. Adams, snapped at him and told him, "Listen to your partners and adjust." Well, Carlos did as said, but he pulled back the glider back too far and too fast. As a result, the rubber band snapped. The rubber band not only slapped Carlos in the face, but broke our glider to pieces because he pulled it back too far and the force hit the fragile wood. Carlos was pissed and turned his anger on me.
"No wonder you suck at math and science,"
he said. This, in addition to all the stuff going on, broke me. It is true that math and science were my worst subjects because I have a learning disability that makes those subjects tough. But I have always loved building and repairing things. My dad is an engineer and some of my earliest memories were of him teaching me how to fix my toys and encouraging me to experiment with different building things. In addition, I was a total daddy's girl. I wanted to make him proud and I knew that me being bad at math and science was something that stressed him out. So, I am not joking, I ran away like in those cliché 90s movies. My house was 2 blocks away and I ran there. Fortunately, my teachers knew that there weren't many places I could have gone and called my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, to tell her what happened and to please return me to school. What I didn't know was that Dad was working home that day. When I ran in crying and upset, he noticed and went after me. He calmed me down and asked what happened. I told him everything about Carlos taking over, about how Janice and I were doing all the hard work and Carlos being a nasty bully, the rubber band snapping and me getting blamed. Dad was quietly hugging me, kissing my forehead. When Dad is quiet, that usually means he's angry. When I looked up, I saw that his mouth was set in a hard line and his eyes were dark. I was scared he was angry at me. I begged him to not be mad at Janice or me because it wasn't our fault. Dad instead reassured me that he wasn't mad at Janice or me, he was mad at Carlos and had an idea to teach that little punk a lesson. Dad then called the school, reassured Mrs. Adams that I was okay and that I would spend the rest of the day at home. He also sent an email to not only Mrs. Adams, but Janice's parents detailing this plan of his. Janice's parents and Mrs. Adams were a game. After we heard it, Janice and I were smiling ear to ear even though we knew we had to put in the work all by ourselves. The next day, Mrs. Adams pulled Carlos, Janice and me aside and said thanks to the glider incident, Carlos was now on his own and had to finish the project by himself. Janice and I would be doing our own project. Carlos was pretty happy about this because
"Those two slowed me down."
However, what Carlos was not thinking about was that since Janice and I were doing all the paperwork, we had all the information. We offered to share our notes with him in an attempt to be fair, but he said,
"It's all in my head, and I don't need it to slow me down. In fact, I bet I can do it even better."
We all had to sign a contract that information was not exchanged and witnessed by Mrs. Adams. The next 2 weeks were easily the best of TT for Janice and me. Since we had all of the notes, we were able to rebuild the glider in less than a week. Our dads even set up a makeshift glider range for us to test and we spent an entire Saturday flying the gliders, one in red, the other in blue, which were the most popular colors according to our surveys. As a result, we improved our glider and even made a game out of it, racing them. When Janice's dad mentioned the red and blue gliders reminded him of the Gemini dueling coaster at Cedar Point. We decided to name the toys after the coaster and make them a 2-for-1. We built the box for our gliders, got our calculations double-checked by not only Mrs. Adams but 2 independent adults as well. Both dads, who were co-workers, signed off on the math, even adding their proof of work and signing the back, this is important for later, a presentation board with an overview along with a huge binder showing all of our work. Janice and I worked really hard on this project and it felt awesome. On our last day we had a pizza party and sleepover, making bets on what Carlos' reaction was most likely going to be. Presentation day arrived. This was one of the few days we could wear something else other than our school uniform, so we were dressed in nice outfits to make our presentations. Janice and I stood together with our gliders and had big smiles on our faces. We looked at Carlos, who had an actual nice looking glider, box, presentation board, paperwork and everything. However, he had an anxious look on his face instead of his usual arrogant and cocky one, which made me happier. Presentation day worked out like this. The first half of the day would be the representatives walking around and judging who had the best looking gliders, boxes, presentation boards, binders, etc. and then we would have lunch and come back. The ones who had been selected for the second round would then make their presentations to not only the representatives but the entire class. Janice and I answered the questions asked by the representatives, arrived with confident and clear answers. One of the businesses that attended was the engineering firm that our dads worked for. They were impressed with our presentation and selected us for the second round. Carlos was also selected and he had a worrisome look on his face when the bell rang. After lunch we returned and something about the way the binder was sitting made me double check. Wouldn't you know it, the pages with double check calculations and proof of work were gone. Carlos, being the dick he was, did not keep notes about his experiments, so he decided to steal our work and present it as his own. Janice and I decided to take a professional approach in order to grind Carlos further into the dirt. I went up to Mrs. Adams and the representatives and asked them if they had gone through our binder when we were gone because the calculations and proof of work pages were missing. Mrs. Adams was immediately suspicious as well, given Carlos' behavior, and immediately walked over, took his binder off the table, flipped through it and found the corrections page. He had hastily scrawled in his name at the top next to ours, so it looked like he was involved. Mrs. Adams looked at him and said, "Carlos, why did you take the pages?" Carlos said,
They gave their work to me, remember?
Fortunately, Janice and I included our copy of the signed contract from earlier, saying Carlos had refused use of our information in our binder and pulled it out. At this point, Carlos looked like the kid who denied he had been eating cookies even though he had a ring of crumbs around his lips.
Well, they stole my double-checked work. See?
He shows the proof of work our dads had done.
I took it out and put it back.
Then Janice looked at one of the men, who I learned later was the supervisor of the team both of our dads were a part of, and said, "Mr. Lionel, could you please check his proof of work? Our dad signed the back of ours." Mr. Lionel agreed and flipped the page over. Carlos did not notice that our dads had signed the back of the proof of work and included their names. Mr. Lionel nodded. "I know those signatures anywhere," he said before looking at Carlos with a glare that could welt a flower. "You told me you wanted to be an engineer someday, right?" Carlos could only nod, his face white. "You're aware that engineers take theft of others' work seriously?" Again, Carlos nodded. "And that if you were doing this in a professional setting, you would not only be fired from the company, but blackballed from the industry?" Mr. Lionel said, staring down at this kid. Carlos looked like a melted snowman and that he wanted to disappear into the ground. I learned later that Mr. Lionel was a nice man, but man, I could immediately see why our dads respected him in that moment. Mr. Lionel turned to Mrs. Adams. "I recommend that he be disqualified from the next round and be made to apologize to these two girls in addition to returning the proofs to them." Carlos did return the paper and apologized for the theft, not looking me in the eye. As a result, not only was Carlos disqualified, but because he cheated, he flunked the project as a whole. Since TT was at least 30% of our science grade, he ended up getting his first D on his report card, which his parents had a frickin' field day with until Mr. Lionel sent them a letter telling them what their son had done and that if he did not shape up, he risked real trouble in his professional life. Janice and I ultimately won Best Design, but the best award was seeing Carlos' ego get knocked down several pegs. He was still a jerk, but was scared of us. Hey, I might be bad at math and science, but at least I know not to be mean to people who might help me someday. And you know guys, talking about school and subjects, I'm wondering, what was your worst and your best subject in school? Personally for me, pretty much since elementary school, I always sucked at math, and that continued on until high school and even until I graduated. And in fact, I'm pretty bad at every science-related subject, even though I am really interested now in science, but I'm just not good at making calculations, etc. And you know, something that really irked me and that I still remember now from high school, essentially we had an English lesson or something where the teacher would talk with us about what kind of job we wanna have later on. And back then, in 8th grade, I was not really that good at English, so for some reason, maybe because I was wearing glasses or something and maybe looked like a nerd, the English teacher suggested that I should become a rocket scientist or something. And well guys, not to stroke my own ego too much or something, even though I am a little proud of that, only 1 or 2 years later I was consistently the best when it came to grades in English. And then in addition, many more years later, I eventually got a master's degree in an English language related subject. Take that, Mrs. You should be a rocket scientist. And guys, unfortunately, we have already reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you haven't already, please also go to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where I upload exclusive Reddit videos starting at just $3 a month. This is a great way to support me in case you are interested, and the chance for me to become independent from YouTube revenue. Thank you so much for watching, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.